So, what I teach is a practice of learning how to quiet our minds and to find a little bit of peace and comfort inside of ourselves so that when we are alone, um, we honestly don't drive ourselves crazy with our own thoughts. So, thoughts are like anything else. We can learn, we can train our minds to think or not think if we don't want to. And that's kind of most people don't believe that. They don't think they have any control over their thoughts. Their thoughts just come. They don't know where they come from. They come up, they just come faster and faster sometimes, and we don't feel like we have any control. And we do have control over them to some degree. We can choose and learn how to ignore our thoughts. And by ignoring them, they tend to slow down and we have less thoughts. And when we have less thoughts, we find out that what's underneath the thoughts is a sense of peace. And it's just there. It isn't something we create. It isn't something we find. It isn't something that we make ourselves feel. It's already there. It's just that our thoughts are so busy and so noisy, we don't notice that it's there.
What did you say? It was a sense of what?
Peace.
Oh, peace. Okay.
Peace, yeah. Peace, calmness, a sense of resting, if you will. Mm-hmm. So we need to rest our bodies. We also need to rest our minds. And this isn't something we've been taught in our lives. It's just not part of our culture to teach ourselves how to learn how to rest our minds. And the first way we do that, or the first thing that we have to realize, I think, is that our thoughts are simply something that occurs. Some scientists say that I don't remember what the percentage was, but it's a very high percentage. 89% of all of our thoughts that we have in any given day are exactly the same thoughts that we had the day before. We just replay the same thoughts. We do. And it's funny, if you pay attention, you'll notice that you go through these same stories. And when we understand a little bit about where thought comes from, it gives us a little bit more control on how to quiet them. And so, a lot of times what I tell people in the beginning, before we start learning how to meditate, and I'll explain that in a minute what meditation is, but to realize that there are two levels to thought. There is something called initial thought, and that's a reaction to our environment or to a memory or to anything really. It's like if you're sitting in a room and you think, I'm cold. That's an initial thought. Now, what happens after an initial thought is it kicks in something that I just refer to as the story. So, I'm cold. I should go get my jacket. Oh, my jacket's up in my apartment. I can't remember where I put it in my apartment. Was it in the closet or was it over on the couch? That's the story. Now, the story is something that is much easier to control than the initial thought. Because the initial thought, we don't know where it comes from. It's like champagne bubbles in a glass. It's all of a sudden you have this thought, I'm cold, I'm warm, I'm hot. Whatever that thought is, it's a thought. But beyond the thought, it'd be fine if we just had those thoughts. I'm cold. Yeah, I'm cold. The chair's warm, the chair's hot, the chair's whatever. That's fine. Our thoughts would be very sporadic and very spread out because we would only think in response to some stimulus. What we do in between those thoughts is the stories. We create the stories, and those are the things that we can control by simply noticing that the story started and going, oh, that's just a story. I don't need to think about that right now. One of my phrases I use is simply not now. If I start to have a story, it's like, oh, not now. I don't need to think about that right now. It's not that important. I can either go back to the initial thought and do something about it, or I can ignore the thought and move on. the reason that this isn't, some people say, well, what's the importance of that? Well, the importance of it is that our minds work all the time.
Here comes the story.
Yeah.
It's cold here.
Yeah? So our minds are busy all the time. Thinking uses energy. And so it literally tires us out on a mental level. We get exhausted. Or we just get so lost in the story, and the story takes us down a path that we don't want to go down, a sad path or a negative path or whatever, that we find ourselves experiencing these emotions we don't want. So if something triggers an emotion about something or someone that wasn't pleasant in the past, instead of just letting it go, we start that story. Oh, what they did to me. Oh my gosh, da 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 da. They never just the whole story just piles on top. And we don't even know we do this. If you notice that, just try and notice that over the next week or two. Just as you have a thought, notice the story. When the story is going, you know what the story is, you'll recognize it. You're telling yourself a story. It's like you were telling someone else a story. You're telling yourself a story. So the idea is to simply notice that you are telling yourself a story. And for a certain amount of time, each day, make a commitment to yourself that you're going to watch your mind, notice when you have a story, and try and stop the story. It's like an exercise. And the more you exercise, the better you get at it. And that's what meditation is. Meditation is simply an exercise of your mind to watch your mind to see what's happening in it. And when you stop the stories, your thoughts get very few and far between. And in between those thoughts, you have just this feeling of calmness and contentment. And the more you get used to that, you'll notice that there's a sense of peace behind that, because you're not worrying about anything anymore. You're not telling yourself a story. You're not. See, what happens is there's a little chart I have, and it's called I can't remember what I called it, but it's the letters TEA, standing the word tea, like we're drinking tea here. Okay, so T stands for thought, E stands for emotion, A stands for action. So this is the way our brains work. We have a thought. T, we have a thought.
Yeah,
E, the thought creates an emotion.
emotion, okay, I didn't know what that was.
And the emotion causes action, which is usually agitation of some kind. Tenseness, wanting to get up, do something. It creates a physical action to it. So our minds work on this circle: thought, emotion, action. Thought, and it goes all the way around. The action creates a new thought, which creates a new emotion. So if we can break the cycle at any point, if we can notice the thought, notice the emotion, or stop the action, then that breaks that cycle and our minds calm down. So if you'll ever notice when you're really agitated about something, or something's really bothering you, you'll notice that you're having thoughts which are causing emotions, which are causing you to be tense and anxious. That's the action. And you just have to, what the magic of all this is as soon as you notice these things, you have the ability to stop them. But if you don't notice them, you don't feel like you're in any control over them. So they're just happening, like boom, boom, boom. What's going on? It's like getting punched or slapped, from different directions. It's like, what's happening? Why can't I stop thinking? Why am I driving myself crazy? Why are my thoughts racing and all of that? Just noticing what's going on, realizing that every time you find yourself in a story, just stop having the story and let the thought come back up, but don't let it start the story again. It's like if I were sitting here and it was cold. I mean, this is a great example, because it's like I'm cold. And then I start thinking about getting my coat. If I just stop thinking about getting my coat, I go back to I'm cold. Yeah, I'm cold. I should go get my coat. Da-da-da. Oh, wait, I'm thinking about what am I? Oh, I'm cold. It's just like a reset button, coming back to the original thought. And then, of course, this is an exercise. I'm not saying you shouldn't do anything when you're cold. I'm just saying it's a good way to notice the way your brain works.